Some breaking news on the investigative front. We've asked NBC's Pete Williams, who's keeping track of the big picture, and Kerry Sanders down in Florida, who's been tracking all those suspects that were getting pilot training down there, to join us now. Pete, let's begin with you.
Well, Tom, what once looked like a fairly routine arrest earlier this week has now emerged, according to a senior government official who tells NBC News Tonight that these arrests have now emerged as the most promising lead in the investigation. Two men arrested on a train are now on their way to New York for further questioning by the FBI. Now, here is the sequence of events. On the day of the suicide airplane flights, two men got on an airplane at the Newark airport bound for San Antonio, Texas. As they're flying and they get over the middle of the country, the FAA grounds all flights. So the plane they're on lands at the nearest available airport, which is San Antonio. These two men then continue their journey by getting on an Amtrak train, but we're told by investigators that they get into some kind of argument with each other. The Drug Enforcement Administration then comes on the train and arrests them on suspicion of possible drug violations because they're carrying a large amount of cash. Then it's discovered that these two men also have box cutters, the similar kind of box cutters that investigators say were used by the hijackers on Tuesday. So now they're being held for questioning. They're on their way to New York to be further debriefed by the FBI, and a senior government official says tonight that government officials feel fairly confident that these two men know about the terror network that was responsible for Tuesday's attack. Could they have played a more prominent role? That hasn't been decided yet. The FBI doesn't know precisely what their role is or was to be, if any, but they're quite confident that they have intimate knowledge of this terror organization. Now, the two men are named Ayub Ali Khan, who is 51 years old, and Mohammed Jaweed Azmath, 47. What's interesting about this, Tom, is that this looked like a fairly low-level arrest. It's gotten a fair amount of attention in Texas because they were on their way to San Antonio, and they were taken off the train in Texas. It's gotten some interest there, but now it really has the interest of the FBI in Washington and New York. A couple of other things. The one person that we heard about arrested tonight on the material witness warrant is one of the men who got into the altercation yesterday and caused the shutdown of the airports in New York, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. He is a person who had some disparity in his identification papers. He's been very unwilling to talk to investigators. The FBI thinks he knows more than he's saying. They can't prove that. They don't know that for sure, and that's why he's being held on a material witness warrant. It allows them to arrest him without charging him with a crime. And finally, we're told by the FBI that there is good material, good evidence being found on a computer seized from Boston that they believe was used by one of the hijackers. Information about how the hijackings were to be carried out, we're told, although no information in that computer, Tom, about any future plans.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Pete Williams. A cautionary note, of course, after what we went through last night. We have to take this all a step at a time, and we'll see what happens to those two men who are being brought to New York for additional questioning. In Florida tonight, NBC's Kerry Sanders, a number of these suspected hijackers that have been identified by the FBI had pretty strong connections to the state of Florida in a variety of ways. Kerry, do you have some new stuff for us tonight?
Well, the FBI has been tracking where they lived, and sort of complicating the FBI investigation is they're finding that they lived in various locations at the same time, moving around, living out of a suitcase, more or less. The one thing that the FBI has been able to stitch together is at least 7 of the pilots on their list of 19, the suicide pilots, were actually trained in Florida. And now there are questions. Were there any sort of warning signs that this was going to happen? There are details emerging tonight from the Cayman Islands.
Line has learned that U.S. government officials are now in the Cayman Islands investigating a letter delivered to a radio station there on August 29th, 12 days before the hijackings. The anonymous letter writer said he was convinced that 3 Afghanis who'd entered the island illegally were agents of Osama bin Laden, and he warned that they, quote, are organizing a major terrorist act against the U.S. via an airline or airlines. He asked a radio station talk show host to pass that information to the authorities and, quote, refrain from being naive and complacent in this serious situation. A radio station manager forwarded the letter to a Cayman government official on September 6th. but according to a government statement, treated it as, quote, merely speculation on the part of the author. The government goes on to say the writer has now been interviewed and has stated that indeed the letter was purely speculation on his part. Dateline has been unable to reach the author. The 3 men the letter writer said were agents of Osama bin Laden are now being held in prison in the Cayman Islands.
Now, those 3 men have not been charged with any crimes. They're being held on immigration charges because they were in the Cayman Islands illegally. The United States has investigators in the Cayman Islands that plan to talk to those 3 men. So, again, this was a letter from an anonymous writer. We have spoken, Dateline has spoken to that writer. But again, the government saying this was just speculation, but certainly a curious connection here of the timing of the letter and, of course, the details. Tom?